Hey mamas, happy Thursday. I hope y'all are having a wonderful morning and can disregard what my children have done to our Christmas tree over here. And I wanted to be down here on the ground so that we can talk a little bit more about diastasis recti, the abdominal separation, your questions, concerns, and learn how to check on that as well. So before, I have all the questions written down here, so hopefully I get to everybody's today. And before we get started on how to check for diastasis recti, I want to talk a little bit about our basic core anatomy, because this is going to be important when we then go to check what's happening in our abdominals. So at the top, you have to think of our core as more of a canister, like a Coke can, than our superficial abdominal muscles, those six-pack muscles, which we generally talk about when we talk about our abs. But really, our entire core is more like a canister. At the very top, underneath our rib cage here, is our diaphragm muscle, which actually drops down as we breathe, as we take a nice deep inhale. The air fills in our lungs, our diaphragm drops down into our abdominal cavity. On the front here, our deepest core layer is actually our transverse abdominals. There, the rectus, our six-pack muscles, sit on top of that. Wrapping around us are our obliques. And behind us, stabilizing our spine on both sides, are our multifidus, or spinal stabilizers. On the bottom of that canister is our pelvic floor muscles, which are the base of our torso, our pelvis. It runs from the front in our pubic symphysis, that pubic bone, all the way down underneath and attaches to our tailbone in the back. And it runs from side to side. If you're sitting down and put your hands underneath your butt, and you can feel both of those sit bones. It runs from side to side there. So it's wrapping underneath you and stabilizing your entire torso, trunk area, and it is the bottom of the core canister. So why is it important to think about our core as an entire canister rather just focusing on our abdominal muscles? What happens is that these muscles are all connected, and you manipulating one of them will lead to changes in your entire core. And we're going to talk about that more as we get down on the ground and actually test for diastasis recti. But it's just important to know that our core is actually an entire canister. Manipulating one group of muscles will change other groups of muscles and how they react as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you're testing for diastasis recti, there's actually two different parts. If you have a paper, pencil, pen, that will be helpful while we're doing this, but you can always rewatch this part and do it again once you have the paper with you. So I want you to lie flat on your back on the floor. I'm going to do it back here so you can see me. If you can't hear me, just let me know over here. But I want you to lie flat on your back, and I'm going to lift up my shirt so you can see what I'm doing and roll down these pants. And what I want you to do is, in the first part, I just want you to lift your head up. It's just a head lift. Okay, keep your shoulders on the ground. That's important. So just a head lift. Tuck that chin in and keep those shoulders on the ground. Then when you're here, I want you to take two fingers to start widthwise, okay? And stick them in the middle of your abdominals. And just kind of feel, if you can feel, again, chin tuck, but it's hard for me to tuck like that. If you can feel both sides of your abdominals. So what you're gonna feel is a little dip in the middle, and you're gonna feel from side to side and see if you can feel both sides of your abdominal muscles. It's normal, everybody has a separation in the middle of their abdominals. It's some tissue called the linea alba. What we're actually doing is feeling that linea alba and feeling both sides of your abdominal muscles on either side. So take those two fingers. This is what it looks like when I'm actually digging in my abdominals. You might have to press down a little bit. You need to get through the fat, press down, feel both sides of those abdominal muscles. And then take those fingers. If you need to add another finger, you want to feel both sides of your abdominals in between your fingers. So you may just need 2 fingers, you may just need 1, you may need 3, you may need 4. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. This is your subjective abdominals. So I'm going to lay back down here. Again, shoulders on the ground, chin tucked, head lift. Take those fingers and feel all the way. Your linea alba tissue runs from your sternum all the way down to your pubic bone here. So I just want you to feel both sides. Feel those 2 sides of the muscles. You're just getting used to feeling the structure of your abdominal muscles at this point. So it may take you a few times. Chin tuck, head lift. Keep feeling. How many fingers in between your abdominal muscles do you need to fit snugly in between your abdominal muscles? 2, 3, 4, 1. Everybody has some separation there. You just need to know how many fingers in between. Again, shoulders down, chin tucked, head lift. Take your time. Most people, when they're measuring for diastasis recti, will measure about 2 or 3 fingers above your belly button. Take a measurement there. You want to take a measurement at your belly button, and then 2 or 3 fingers below your belly button. The separation can be different above and below your belly button, and at your belly button is typically the weakest point of your abdominals. Just structurally, that's going to be the weakest part. So most people will have a greater separation at the belly button, and then they can have a greater separation up top or a greater separation on the bottom, or kind of evenly all the way through their abdomen. So you're going to do that a couple times. Tuck your chin, lift your head, feel down your abdominal wall, see how many fingers you need to fit in between the middle of your muscles there. And the second part that's important to note is how many knuckles deep can you press your fingers down in there. So some people will only be able to push down a little bit into that tissue. Some people will be able to push really far down into that tissue. You want to make a note of how far down you're pressing your fingers as well. So your abdominal separation measurements are not only how wide your muscles are, but also how deep you can fit those fingers into that tissue in the middle of your abdominal wall. So that's the first part. Go back and go through this if you need to still take some time to do that. We're going to move on to the next part of measuring for your diastasis recti, which is taking note of your breathing as you're doing that. So remember when I said that manipulating one part of these musculature of your core canister can also manipulate different muscles. Here's how we're going to use that. Before I get down, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to lie back flat on my back, and then I'm going to take a nice deep inhale through my nose, really relax, let your belly expand. What's going to happen is that pressure from your lungs into your rib cage, that diaphragm dropping down into your abdominal cavity, everything's going to fill up a little bit. Let your abdomen go. Nobody's looking. And then on that exhale, I want you to do a pelvic floor contraction. It doesn't need to be like your maximum pelvic floor contraction or Kegel, as you might know it, but just enough to where you can feel that contraction in your pelvic floor. When you do that, you should be able to feel a tensing on the inside of your hip bones as well. This is where you're most likely to feel your transverse abdominals, or that deep core that we talked about. So on the exhale, inhale, exhale through your mouth, pelvic floor contraction on the inside of your hip bones. You should be able to feel the tensing of those muscles. That is your transverse abdominis turning on. So and at the same time, you're doing that exhale, pelvic floor contraction. I want you to, again, tuck your chin, lift your head, and then feel that tissue again on the midline of your abdomen. most likely what's going to happen is that the feeling of that tissue is going to change as you engage your transverse abdominis. You're turning that on, it's pulling, tightening that linea alba, and you may not be able to stick your fingers down as far into your abdomen, or at least that's what we hope. So I'm seeing a lot of reactions here. Tell me if this is happening for you. So I'll do it with you now. There's a lot of moving parts, so we'll go through it together. Let's lay on our back. Okay, first I want you to practice that nice deep inhale through your nose. Really just relax, let everything expand. And then on the exhale, exhale through your mouth, pelvic floor contraction, hold that contraction, tuck your chin, lift your head. Now feel. Keep that contraction as long as you can, but when you lose that contraction, drop your head back down, take that nice deep inhale again, exhale, pelvic floor contraction, tuck your chin, lift your head, keep your shoulders on the ground. Feel that tissue again. Do you feel a difference in that tissue? It should be a little bit tighter and stronger. But again, you want to take the measurements at this point as well. How many fingers can you fit in between those abdominal muscles again? Above your belly button, at your belly button, below your belly button. And then you also want to measure how far can you sink those fingers into that tissue again. So you're taking the measurements, just breathing normally without that intense contraction on your exhale. And then the second time, you also want to take those measurements with the pelvic floor contraction, with the transverse abdominal engagement, and see the difference between that. So why is that important? Because we want to be able to hold the contents of our abdomen inside as we're doing abdominal exercises. Even if you have weakness on the first part, when you're just breathing normally and you have a lot of tissue weakness as you're sinking your fingers down into your linea alba. But when you do the pelvic floor contraction, when you engage your transverse abdominals, if that tissue is nice and tight and you can't really sink your fingers down into it when you do that, that's great news. That means that you can actively engage your abdominals to support the exercise that you're trying to do. So it's easiest to do this when you're lying on your back, flat on the ground, because you're really taking the pressure of gravity away from you in that position, versus when you're over in a plank like this, you're having your abdominals engage against gravity. So it's a lot harder to feel what might be going on at that point. So I hope that made sense. If you have any questions about the check, then let me know in the comments. And if I don't get to them in this video, I'll come back and comment with some answers to help you after that. Let me go ahead and check in here. Just went for my 6-week postpartum checkup. Midwife said I must have had some really good workout routine because my abs were pretty darn good after 2 pregnancies. I sure you are awesome. Awesome, Lindsay. That's great. That's amazing. So I'm so glad that she checked and that you had some really great abdominal engagement when she was checking. So if anybody wants to do the check, drop in the comments what you find. If you feel a difference between when you're not engaging versus when you're actively engaging, if you're confused about any of this, just drop it in the comment below, and I will come back and I can answer those later too. Now I want to get to some of the questions that were asked about diastasis recti. So actually, I need to hit one more point before we get to the questions. So what is considered diastasis recti is a separation of greater than 2 fingers width in the middle of your abdominal muscles. That's technically called diastasis recti. I want to put a big asterisk next to that because most of us don't know what our abdominal muscles look like before pregnancy. So there are a lot of people that may have had a greater abdominal separation just resting in your everyday life. That's just what your abdominal musculature may have looked like before pregnancy, but most of us aren't going to check then. So take that with a grain of salt. You may have a little bit wider, a little bit more narrow separation in your abdominal muscles, and that's just how you were built. So that is technically the diastasis recti, but our research has shown us even more important than how separated your abdominal muscles are is the fact that how far can you sink your fingers into that tissue. What that tells us is that your abdomen, that tissue, really isn't strong enough to hold in the contents of your abdominal cavity and that pressure that we create from breathing and moving. And what happens is when that tissue is weak, you're going to start to see some pressure doming up through your abdomen, which is what we consider the doming or the coning that you're looking for in diastasis recti. So when you're doing an abdominal exercise or activity, and you're looking at your abdomen and it's kind of peeking up, doming right in that midline, right in the center. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about doming or coning, things to look for as signals of diastasis recti. And what that is the pressure from your abdominal cavity pressing into that weakened tissue, letting you know that your tissue, your muscles, your core just isn't strong enough for the exercise that you're doing or the way that you're doing it. So my suggestion is not to freak out if you do see doming or coning. Most people freak out, automatically think diastasis recti, and they go down that rabbit hole. But you don't have to fear the doming or coning. Just take it as information. Try to take your head back down. Say you're doing a sit-up and you see that doming or coning. Come back down. Remember to manipulate the contraction again. Contract your pelvic floor, contract your transverse abdominals, try it again. Do you still see that as you're doing that activity? If not, great. Then you were able to activate your muscles appropriately for the task. Fine. If you do still see the doming or coning, then try to manipulate your posture. Oftentimes, if we have a here we go. If we have a rib thrust, okay, and our ribs are tilted up, that's going to put a lot more pressure on the midline of our linea alba here. It's going to make it a lot harder to actively engage it because it's pulled already. So try to bring your ribs down, or at the same time in your hips or pelvis. If we are tilted forward like this, again, pulling on that linea alba tissue, a lot harder to engage it effectively. You may need to tuck that pelvis just into a neutral stance, not under, but just into a neutral stance here, and try to engage again. So some things that you can try, test it again. Do you still see the doming or coning? Then your core just may not be strong enough for that exercise at that time. You can always test it again later. So, all right, I wanted to get to that to let you know what's important when you are testing for diastasis recti, what to pay attention to. Now, I'll get to the questions. Is it true that every pregnant mom has some sort of diastasis recti? Yes. The research has shown us that 99 to 100% of women will have an abdominal separation in their third trimester of pregnancy. So if you think about it, that just makes sense. That's how our core, our abdomen grows as our baby grows in our stomachs as well. Our muscles are going to have to separate. That tissue in the middle of our muscles is going to have to stretch and thin to accommodate this growing uterus inside of us. So diastasis recti in pregnancy is not really something that we have to be overly concerned about or overly feared, because that's what's supposed to happen. So I'm going to skip to another question that was asked. Is there a way to minimize the severity of diastasis recti while pregnant? And yes and no. So I know that's as clear as mud. There is a way to reduce how severe it could be, but there is no way to completely take away the occurrence of diastasis recti, no matter what you do, because a lot of whether you will have diastasis recti or not will be genetics. A lot of genetics. Nutrition is also a factor. There are many different factors that will come into play whether you have diastasis recti or not in postpartum. So you can't manipulate all of the different variables, but what you can manipulate is how severe it might have been. If you are paying attention to your core, paying attention to that doming or the coning in the middle of your abdomen as you are pregnant and as you are working out, if you see that doming or coning, it's probably best to stop that exercise at that point in your pregnancy and probably moving forward. So if you are in your first trimester and you're still planking and it feels good and your core engagement feels great, awesome. And then you get into your second trimester where your belly really starts to expand, your abdominals really start to separate, things start to grow in here, and your planks, you're just not getting as great core engagement. You may look down and see a nice little line in the middle of your abdomen, and that's probably the time that you should take planks out of your fitness routine and replace them with another abdominal exercise for the duration of your pregnancy. What we don't want to do is when you see the doming or coning, just continue to keep doing that same exercise. Go out and do 100 sit-ups when you're already seeing the pressure come into your linea alba, because what's going to happen is you're just going to keep putting pressure on that tissue that's already stretched and weakened, and that could actually exacerbate what is the separation between your abdominal muscles and injure it further, so that it's harder for it to heal and repair in postpartum. So I hope that answers that question too. How can we know if an ab workout is aggravating or helping ab separation? So what you can do is, since you're used to feeling along that midline of your abdomen, when you're on your back and doing ab exercises on your back, or even sitting up, a lot of times, if you're holding, your feet up off the ground, a lot of times I'll just sit here and feel my midline as well. You can obviously look if you don't have your shirt on, or if it's lifted up. You can look and see if you see any doming or coning, but I just like to place a hand here and feel, okay, what is my linea alba doing right now? Do I feel it, that tissue pressing up against my hand? It would kind of feel like, for lack of a better term, when you open up a new can of biscuits or something like that, and you're just seeing the biscuits poke through the canister. So are you feeling that linea alba tissue poke up above the rest of your muscles on the side? If you do, then that linea alba is telling you it's not, your core isn't engaging properly. So that is not going to be a helpful exercise for you. Again, you can come back down, try to re-engage your pelvic floor, transverse abdominal, try it again. If it's still happening, then you might need to take that exercise back down one step. Test it again and continue on until you find where your abs are engaging properly and there's no extra pressure in that midline. So that's how you'll know whether this activity is helpful or not for your healing abdominals and strengthening abdominals. It does get a little bit more complicated as you are obviously in a face down position. So if you're working back up to planks and you then get in this plank and you're like, okay, well, you're gonna have to figure out if this is appropriate for you somehow. If you have a friend that might be able to feel there, great. If not, sometimes I do try to rock to the side, spread my feet apart, rock to the side, feel, okay, what's happening in my abdomen right now? Do I feel a pressing of that tissue against my fingertips or not? So that's just a little bit more difficult, but it still can be done if you have somebody that's familiar with what they're feeling for and can assist you with finding out whether planks are appropriate for you or not, or if you can actually rock on one hand and check with the other what's happening in your abdominals. That's probably the quickest way to check whether an exercise is really going to be helpful for you or not. So if you feel the pressing of that tissue into your fingertips as you're feeling your abdomen, then that's probably not a great exercise for you. Again, if you're just testing, it's not that big of a deal. Try again. If you plan on doing like 100 bicycles, and you see that abdominal coning, you might need to slow it down. You may need to work on re-engaging your transverse abdominals again, or you may need to step down a notch if you need to. Let me see if anybody else has posted some questions here. Sarah's tagging everybody. Thank you. Sarah, I don't think there were any more. Okay, haven't missed any more questions at this point. Okay, so let's see what else. What can we look for? So similar question. What can we look for, feel for? How can we know if we're engaging our abs effectively? Really feeling that tissue in the middle of your abdomen is going to be one of the greatest indicators whether that exercise is helpful for you or not. If you can feel that tissue, if it's just right in line with those muscles, maybe even dip down a little bit. You don't want that tissue like really concave in your abdomen. But if it's kind of right there in line with your muscles, then you know that that exercise is really appropriate for you. But if you feel that tissue kind of pressing out into your fingertips, if it feels like it's kind of bubbled above the muscles on either side, then that exercise is probably not helping you when you are trying to strengthen your core. So that tissue, the linea alba, can be strengthened just like the rest of the muscles in our body. Tissue can be strengthened just like the muscle. So what you want to do is find where you're at right now in your core strengthening, and that's going to be different for everybody. And then you're going to start to build that musculature or build that tissue strengthening on top of that, build that muscle strengthening onto that, just like we do with all the rest of the muscles in our body. You don't come to your first iStroll class with a set of 12-pound hand weights. Most of us don't, unless you've been working out somewhere else for a really long time. We're going to start with those 5s, and then we're going to progress from there. It's the exact same thing with your core, and when you're talking about strengthening it and diastasis recti, healing that, strengthening it, you're going to start with the basics, and you're going to progress from there. So I want to talk just in a minute about some basic exercises to help you get started, and then you'll have to progress from there. But I want to talk just about some basic ones. So the first thing I want you to do is just that breathing exercise that we were talking about. I want you, when you're lying on your back, inhale, expand that rib cage, really let go of your abdominals. It's important to let them go. A lot of us are sucking in all day long, and that's not going to be helpful for actual core strengthening and healing. You're going to let it go. Let that breath go all the way into your core, all the way down into your pelvic floor. And then on the exhale, I want you to work on your pelvic floor contraction, deep core activation. So again, you can feel right on the insides of those hip bones, whether you're really tensing that area, that's your transverse abdominis turning on. And so just work on breathing. Inhale, relax everything. Exhale, contract and tighten. What you want to do is build that connection from your mind to your pelvic floor and your deep core, just figuring out where those muscles are and how to turn them on. Once you're able to do that, then you're going to lie on your back, nice deep inhale, relax everything. Exhale, cue that connection to your core and pelvic floor. Take a heel and slide it. So you're working on actually moving the lower part of your body while you're keeping that contraction all the way through that exhale. Try again. Inhale, exhale, connect, feel the tensing on those hip bones, slide that heel out and back in all the way through that exhale. Make sure you can hold that contraction all the way out and all the way back in. Progressing from heel slides. What you're going to do is then you're going to lift that heel and hover it all the way out, all the way back in. Okay? Lift that heel all the way out, all the way back in. You're doing this with your breathing, but I'm just giving you kind of a quick overview of how to progress that. So you start with your heel just sliding on the ground. You progress to lifting the heel and hovering it and out. Again, still watching for doming or coning in your midline. If you see any of that, then try to redo it. And if not, you may need to stay with the step lower. After that, you're going to work, knee lifts, heel lifts. Keeping that contraction the whole way. Okay, so marches, supine marches, knee lifts, it's considered a few different things. Once you get to that stage, the next step is going to be holding these knees up. This is a little bit harder. Make sure your low back isn't popping up too. That's what a lot of us do. Keep that low back. You don't have to press it into the ground, but just that natural curve of your low back here. So just holding that and continuing to breathing. That's the next step. Then the next step after that, dropping those heels. One at a time. On your exhale, keeping that contraction. And y'all, this is still actually hard for me. If I'm not lifting my low back and I'm just working on my core contraction and breathing through this, then you're going to use your arms as well. Opposite hand, opposite. I can't actually drop my arm all the way down because my couch is right there, but these are dead bugs. Okay? After you're doing dead bugs, or kind of at the same time, I also want you to work on breathing over in this tabletop position. So you're going to work on contracting that core against gravity. Inhale, exhale. You can learn how to contract that core against gravity, and that's going to help you to work back into moves, exercises like planks and things like that as well. So that was just a really quick overview of how to start to work on that core engagement and strengthening, but it's essentially the same as it is with any other muscle in your body. You're going to gradually and progressively load it to get stronger. So you're going to move into different positions. You're going to gradually move your legs and arms in different ways to test the strength of your core. So if you guys have any further questions on this, again, just leave them in the comments. Feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to jump back on here and answer any questions, concerns that you have here, or if I didn't explain anything in a way that you understood, then let me know that as well. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Thursday. Thank you so much for taking some time with me today, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.